Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Lisa Savage from Solon, Maine. Lisa's a school teacher, and she's the coordinator of Code Pink in Maine. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you, Bruce.
Great to have you here.
Thanks for asking
Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about this group that you're coordinating in Maine, Code Pink.
Code Pink is a women-led grassroots peace and war resistance organization that's been working since just before the Iraq invasion to redirect resources from military spending to domestic needs at home. Here in Maine, we have an active group, and I'm the local coordinator for that.
And so you, Code Pink is a national organization, so they have chapters in many states around the country.
Code Pink has offices in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, and then they have local chapters in many of the states around the world, really. Actually, in Japan and Jordan are two countries that have Code Pink chapters.
You and I have been co-coordinating in Maine the Maine campaign to bring our war dollars home for the past 2 years. Why don't you talk about this effort and why it's so important?
Well, the Maine campaign to bring our war dollars home was a coalition effort. I think about 25 groups here in the state of Maine have joined the effort. And essentially it's responding to our perception that when we spend our resources on destruction and building weapons of mass destruction, we don't have money to invest in infrastructure needs, in repairs, in education, job training, and those sorts of real human needs. So Bring Our War Dollars Home is an effort to get local people to bring pressure on their representatives in Congress to stop funding wars and instead fund things that people need.
Why don't you describe some of the kind of activities that we've done in the campaign here in the state?
The local resolution has been the primary tool, and that would be a town such as Deer Isle or Bath or the city of Portland discussing sending such a resolution to their representative in Congress. Even if the resolutions don't pass, it creates the space to have a good discussion among people in the community, and so that's been a primary tool. Then also we do a lot of letter to the editor writing, op-eds, and also hold events in communities so that people can come together, have a public forum, talk about the needs that aren't being met in their community because of funding shortfalls, and then get an idea of exactly the vast sums of money that are spent on military.
How do you think people are responding in the state to this Bring Our War Dollars Home message?
Increasingly, people know something's wrong. They know that things aren't being funded that they need. They know that the roads they drive on are getting worse, schools are being closed, and so forth. But they get a lot of bad information, I think, from the mainstream press about why that is. And increasingly, people are interested to know that over 50% of the discretionary federal budget is spent on war funding. Or just to know that like one bomb that's dropped on Libya of a certain kind costs $1 million. $1 million would solve the problems of a small school district in the state of Maine. So I think people are increasingly seeing that there's a connection, that these dots do need to be connected.
Well, we know that Maine's share of war spending since 2001 is now more than $3.4 billion. Oh, you're a teacher in Solon. What kind of cuts have you been seeing in the school system and that this money could have gone towards?
Well, in my own very small school district that has less than 1,000 students, they closed an elementary school. They very likely may close another elementary school. They've laid off teachers, math teachers, French teachers, and so forth. And that would just be a microcosm of across Maine, many, many school districts lost educators and, elementary schools, so that very young children tend to go to the little local elementary school. They end up riding the school bus for an hour or an hour and a half, a kindergartner just to get to school.
Do you think that rural schools in Maine are being more impacted than, let's say, some in the larger cities, or do you think it's across the board?
I think it's across the board is my impression. Certainly layoffs, reductions in force of teachers and other school personnel is across the state.
Why don't we see more teachers speaking out as you do about ending war spending and moving that money into things like education?
It's a very good question, Bruce. I think it's a multiple answer. One answer would be not everyone would agree with me, but many of the people that I work with would share our analysis of the fact that this is a problem in our society. I think it's a combination of two things primarily, and this would be true of just your regular neighbors in Maine, across the country, really. One is that they lack good sources of information, and that might be surprising about teachers, but we all were brought up in a society that claims to have the free press, yet the information that we receive from corporate-owned media is very slanted, very, very limited, and people who only get information from corporate media sources think they're well informed, but they really are rather poorly informed. So I think that's one factor. Probably the stronger factor is people are afraid. People are economically afraid. School teachers are not very rich. They don't have a lot of resources to fall back on. And like most people, they just want to raise a family, have a house, have a garden. And I think that they're kind of afraid to question the dominant paradigm, because if it falls apart, they may end up worse off than they are. And certainly their children or their grandchildren may end up,
What do you mean by that? That if they challenge the dominant paradigm, they might be worse off. In what way might they? What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess what I mean is that I think most people in America right now, the middle class, can feel the middle class buffers slipping away. Social Security is under threat. Medicare is under threat. In Maine, teachers would be part of the Maine state retirement system, not Social Security, but it's been under threat since the last couple years at the state level. So a lot of the safety net that the middle class has enjoyed, it really started to go away when so many people didn't have health care. I mean, people lose their houses. A lot of foreclosures are because someone in the family had a serious illness and the money wasn't there. So people, middle class people, already sense that it's a dangerous time, and there are no guarantees that their family will come out of these dangerous times being able to care for each other. And I think that frightens people, so they just kind of turn away from that knowledge and stay busy. Most teachers work pretty hard at their job, and they usually are involved in other kinds of hobbies like growing food or doing volunteer work in their communities very often.
But if you, I mean, I think what you're saying is true. I understand what you're saying, but what I guess I don't understand is if I'm feeling kind of challenged and sort of under siege, my way of life under siege, I want to, first of all, understand why it's happening, who's causing it, and then I want to do something about it. You know, remember, we were all taught we live in a democratic society, and it's the citizens who are supposed to make the changes, you know, that are then reflected in our government. So let's don't just pick on the teachers here, but let's think of everyone in our country. Why are people not responding more directly? I think we're seeing around the world, in Europe, for example, massive protests in many different countries in Europe, and in the Middle East as well, the Arab Spring. People that are seeing their way of life under siege because this whole corporate domination of the economy and getting rid of social programs, social progress, it's a global phenomenon now. Other people are reacting to it. But in America, as you say, people are sort of turning away and maybe hiding out instead of responding and trying to protect through activism and other things like that, protect their way of life.
Well, I can quote someone who my husband had a discussion with at a social event last week. This was a younger person, not a teacher. He's a hedge fund analyst. He's in his early 30s. And he made the statement in response to the recent debt ceiling deal that went down in Washington that, well, entitlements, meaning Social Security and Medicare and the like, will have to be dialed way back to continue paying for the wars. And my husband questioned him, why would we need to continue paying for these exorbitant wars? And this young person's response was, because if we don't fight them over there, they will come here and kill us because they hate us. To which my husband said, why would they hate us? And the young man very readily admitted, because of all the horrible things that we've done in those countries in the past. And our intel, he kept using the word intel like he worked for the Army or something. Intel says that we're under threat, so we need to keep spending the money to, to have drones drop bombs on them in order to continue to keep Americans safe. I don't agree with that analysis at all, but I think it's an example of the kind of whistling in the dark. Don't tell me I don't want to know, it's too frightening. Understanding that many Americans have from basically watching corporate news all the time.
Well, and listening to our own president. As I was leaving this morning to come here to the studio to prepare to do this show with you, I saw an email saying that Obama's new Secretary of Defense,
You mean the old head of the CIA?
Leon Panetta, saying that, yes, we're going to have to cut Medicare in order to continue the military buildup that goes along with everything this hedge fund guy is saying. So he's getting this information not only from the mainstream media, but from the leaders of the Democratic Party. And so this is one of my frustrations, is that we see this unity now between the Republicans and Democrats on this idea of destroying social programs and continuing this war, continuing this military buildup. What distinction do you see, or what difference do you see between the Republicans and Democrats today when it comes to questions like this?
Well, it's pretty clear to me that our government doesn't represent us anymore. It represents corporations. So the Republicans and Democrats are both funded by corporations. President Obama is essentially a celebrity spokesman for the corporations, and really it's almost impossible to be in Congress or to become the president unless you receive millions of dollars in corporate contributions. I think the false dichotomy between Republicans and Democrats is used to manipulate the American public, and that people have an identity that perhaps came from the family that they grew up in. But it's very hard for Americans to get below the surface of Democrat, Republican, or who you're going to vote for. It's very hard for people to give up the notion that this is a government of, by, and for the people. I'm a very idealistic person. I believed that when I was young. It's been very painful to realize it's not true. And I think many people don't want to face up to that painful experience.
Let's get back to the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign for a moment. You've been instrumental in getting National Code Pink, the organization that you're affiliated with, to pick up the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign. And it's been spreading now quite successfully across the country. Resolutions have been passed in Solon, your community, at the school board level. Deer Isle Town Meeting passed a resolution. The Portland, Maine City Council passed one. The Amherst and Northampton, Massachusetts city councils passed resolutions. Hartford, Connecticut did. And then Code Pink was really helpful in bringing a resolution to the recent U.S. Conference of Mayors that hadn't made a foreign policy resolution since the Vietnam War, but they passed that Bring Our War Dollars Home resolution. And then right after that, Los Angeles City Council in California and Eugene, Oregon passed these resolutions. So can you talk about how this message is really spreading across the country, and more importantly, that local communities, local officials are for the first time getting engaged in this discussion, and why is it so important for these local politicians to say something about this?
Well, it's the local officials that have to deal with the budget cuts that prevent them really literally from filling potholes, and they're the ones who hear from their constituents, why did you close the library in my neighborhood? That's where my children went during the summer. So after several years of dealing with budget cuts upon budget cuts, I think local officials get pretty frustrated, and they feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They don't get the funds that they once relied on from the federal government, and at the same time, the local people expect the services that they need. So it's an idea that's at the right place at the right time, let's say. Bring Our War Dollars Home is a good, clear communication strategy. Even a child can understand those words and what they might mean. So it's not a new analysis, but it's a very useful and sturdy way of putting that message out about what to do. I think that local officials like mayors, particularly big city mayors, are really struggling. I mean, they have to stop giving police and fire services to entire neighborhoods in Detroit, for instance, and that's very frightening. So the U.S. Council of Mayors was a very interesting body to have pass a resolution, because you have to be the mayor of a city of 30,000 or more to belong to this conference. And they have an annual conference, and they first started in 1932 in the depths of the Great Depression, and they met first in Detroit, and they basically got together to say, how are we going to pull our cities out of this economic decline? And actually the New Deal, FDR's New Deal, incorporated many of the recommendations that were made in 1932 at the mayors. So this year, the mayors considered the resolution, and I was there in Baltimore on June 20th when they did so. Because the resolution had passed committee but then was pulled out of a chunk of resolutions that the whole plenary was going to consider, there was a floor debate, and the mayors got a chance to stand up and say, I do support the troops. I am proud of their service. I am not in any way trying to attack active duty military personnel, but this drain on our financial resources has got to stop, or my city's going down the tubes. Many of the mayors that spoke actually were veterans, or said, this is the only resolution I heard from my constituents about, and those constituents were veterans. So that was an interesting coming together of parts of the movement that were considered to be sort of split or at odds with one another back in Vietnam in 1970. I think the mayors passed a similar resolution.
And so do you think that this process of these resolutions will continue for some time?
I think so. It's a very good opportunity for people in local communities to have a talk about what's going on, and where the solution might lie. What was the number you mentioned? What is Maine's contribution again?
$3.4 billion.
$3.4 billion. Maine has a pretty small budget. $3.4 billion is a heck of a lot of money in the Maine state budget.
Absolutely. Go a long way in alleviating a lot of our problems.
Really
this October marks the 10th year of the war in Afghanistan. Nationwide polls show that 70% of the American people want us to get out of Afghanistan as soon as possible, and they want those dollars brought home. And so I know there's going to be a lot of activities across the country marking this 10 years of war. There's going to be big protests in D.C., kind of an occupation near the White House of a park, a nonviolent resistance opposing the war. But there's also an effort being planned here in Maine by the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign. You want to just talk about it in a broad way?
Yeah, it's a very exciting effort to do about a 30-day series of activities that would bring communities around the state in contact with the Bring Our War Dollars Home caravan, I think we're calling it. And so some campaigners could join with people that are working on different issues in their community. And so we have a good cross-section geographically, and also of groups that we're working with. It's going to start September 10th at Unity College with a WERU Community Radio is holding a Maine Grassroots Media Conference, and they invited the campaign to come and teach people how to silkscreen t-shirts. A lot of times the skills about how to get a message out, blogging, tweeting, silkscreening, are useful skills for people to have. So the campaign is going to be doing that. I'm sure there'll be college students and others in the community on hand. The Maine Union of Visual Artists has been so good in working with the campaign, produced a lot of poster designs. Some of those are going to be offered for t-shirts. Another event that's really exciting that will be in this area is on Friday, September 30th. There's an Afghanistan teach-in at Bowdoin College. It involves a couple of authors who've written books on Afghanistan, two Bowdoin professors, and some members of the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign. So that's an exciting event as well. And then on into October, with October 10th, I think, being planned as the finale event. October 10th is a day off for teachers as Columbus Day, but it's also celebrated as Indigenous Peoples Day. And we hope to do something with them.
So we're going to have a van that goes from one event to the other, and there'll be people coming and joining and participating, everything from church services or commemorations of the 10th year to vigils, to teach-ins, as you say, all different kinds of events all over the state. We're buying radio ads, and we'll be asking people to write letters to the editor during this time, talking about how we could use those dollars back here in Maine. And we're going to make leaflets and go to college campuses and leaflet students, urging them to speak up more about the growing cost of education. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Here you are a teacher, a high school teacher. Mm-hmm. You try to get students to go to college. What are you seeing and hearing from these students about the cost of education? What are their feelings about that today?
Well, I'm living in a community where most of the jobs left over the last 20 years. There just are no manufacturing jobs. People do work in the woods, cutting lumber. There are a few convenience stores to work at, and the school district. Those are really the employers. So financial resources are slim, and many of our students do get accepted to college, and they do get some financial aid, but they find once they're there, their family really is unable to contribute enough to keep them in school. So many times in Maine, this is true in other communities as well, students incur some debt for starting college, but then they are unable to finish and they still owe the debt. Other people who do go on and get a degree can end up with tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, depending on which schools they went to. And with the job market as bad as it is and unemployment as high as it's been, they very often can find a job without real benefits, without a salary to pay those kind of loans back. So young people today are really in a pickle, and they kind of know it.
And so they're becoming increasingly, I imagine, desperate and in a way depressed about their own future, aren't they?
They do, and it's been interesting to me in teaching school for about 20 years now that it seems to me that young people don't quite believe in the future as much as perhaps I did when I was 16 or 17. I think part of that is because they're aware of how much we've degraded the environment and what a risk that is to all human life, really any life forms on Earth. It's a hard time to be a young person right now.
All the more reason, I think, the generation of parents and grandparents out there, all the more reason, I think, why we have to become increasingly active at this time, because we can't just say, well, it's up to you young people now. I hear a lot of people say that. Us older people, we've messed it all up, and so now it's up to you young people to straighten it all out. No, I think people our age and people older than us, we have an obligation to, as long as we're breathing, right, to be engaged in trying to help make things better for the future generations.
I agree with you, Bruce. One of the things that I often say to people who say, oh, what can I do, is we all have different talents. I happen to be a communications person. I worked in journalism, I worked in advertising. Teaching is a communications job. So that's what I'm good at, and that's what I do. Other people are good at doing what Cesar Chavez said, how you organize. You talk to a person, and then you talk to another person. I try to do that too, but some people just have a genius for that. Everywhere they go, every grocery store line they stand in, by the time they're gone, they've made a friend. And others build things for us or create art. Creativity and artistic expression is very, very important in the movement to keep our morale up and to let people know who we are and what we're doing. So I urge everybody to think about what your talents are and your inborn, desires and bring what you have to the party. You don't have to say, oh, I can't do that, or everybody can do things well.
So how is our Maine congressional delegation doing when it comes to voting on war spending? Can you give us a breakdown on our two senators and our two members of the Congress, or the House of Representatives?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Bruce, because our two senators, it's easy to answer, always vote for war funding, take tons of money from weapons manufacturers to get in office, and speak with them. I believe you spoke with Senator Olympia Snowe in Vassalboro recently.
Hallowell.
And last year I had the same opportunity where I ran into know, they basically always say, well, we have troops in the field, and as long as troops are in the field, I have to keep voting the money, which is obviously like circular reasoning, but that's their story and they're sticking to it. Our representatives in the House, on the other hand, have done a much better job of listening to their constituents and paying attention to what the people of Maine who sent them to Congress want represented there. And they have been consistent no votes against the war funding supplemental bills, which were introduced during the Bush administration off to the side of the big defense bill each year. Obama also did that twice on his watch, and now it's all folded into the defense authorization bill. They both voted no on that as well, and I'm sure that was a difficult vote for them.
Yeah, because you're talking about Pingree and Michoud.
Right.
They're bucking the tide against even their own party now, aren't they?
Indeed they are. Indeed they are. And Congresswoman Pingree especially has been very vocal, willing to be a leader, to make speeches on the House floor, to go on the talk shows and talk about essentially the need to stop funding the military and turn the money back to needs at home.
Do you think the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign has had any impact on Pingree and Michoud in this respect?
It's hard to say. We certainly have kept in touch with them regularly. Just last week we sent them a copy of the penny poll where 1,500 people all over Maine and all the counties of Maine showed where they would spend federal budget dollars. Of course, it was education, healthcare, and Veterans Affairs in that order. Military was second to last. We have communicated with them regularly, and I think that you overheard Congresswoman Pingree say to a companion at the Common Ground Fair last year, where we will again be tabling this year, these people are everywhere, just because we ran into her at so many parades and public events and so forth. So
that's right. So we only have a couple minutes left. What do you think people can do, again, to get involved? Why don't you first tell what our website is?
Our website address is bringourwardollars.home.org. That's for the Maine campaign. For the national campaign for Code Pink, it's wardollars.home.org. I think if you Google Bring Our War Dollars Home, it will take you to the Maine campaign link. And there we have a calendar of events and ways to contact us. And you can take a look at some of the things that have happened in the past and say, hey, I can do that.
Good. And also, I want to make an announcement about an upcoming event that Veterans for Peace in Maine is organizing. On the weekend of August 27th, the Blue Angels are coming for another air show to Brunswick. And so the Maine Veterans for Peace will be organizing a demonstration out in front of what used to be the Navy base in Brunswick. So on Saturday, August 27th, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., you can join Maine Veterans for Peace protesting this massive environmental a waste of fuel and creating toxic pollution by these airplanes, and also recognize that it's a big military recruiting gimmick. And again, making this point that we should be using those dollars to bring those dollars home for social progress, for funding social progress. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Bruce.
It's great to have you. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.